Hey, so I'm Taylor Burrell, and I'm doing my article on the use of alternate assessments in math. And the reason I'm doing this article is because I want to be a secondary mathematics teacher, and this was specifically focusing on high school math teachers and their opinions on alternate assessments. So, to start off, I would like to give some brief history about assessments in math to begin with, especially in high school. Now, there's a traditional math assessment, and the types of assessment most of us are probably used to in our math courses, which we probably did take at one point in our lives, was having a pencil and paper and answering math questions that involved math operations. These assessments are usually timed and involve math computation. So this is the most common. But what's happening is we're trying to implement different types of assessment into math, which is pretty hard because math is computation for most people that are in high school. So what this study did was it investigated 60 math teachers in 11 different schools, 11 different high schools, and it was in Sydney, Australia, and it was asking the teachers their attitudes toward alternative assessments in math. So, the beginning thing was they did a survey, and it asked them a few different specific questions. Now, the questions involved have to do with the alternative assessments that were asked about. Now, there were 6 different alternative assessments that were asked about. The first was oral tasks, and that was usually asking, it was presentations or short answer or debates. The next different assessment is practical tasks, which students use instruments to apply mathematical principles. So maybe a compass or a calculator or something in that matter. The third alternative assessment was teacher observation of students, and that's pretty straightforward. The teacher observes the students and records how well they're doing. The next is student journals, which is where they kind of reflect on their understanding of what's being taught and how well they understand what's going on in the math class. The fifth one was student self-assessment, and I think this is very similar to student journals in that the students judge their own and their classmates' mathematical understandings and progress. And the sixth was involving parents in the assessment process, which I don't know if that would be one of the ones I would enjoy as a math student. Your parent would be observing their child, so my parents would be observing me and seeing how well I did and how well I understood the math that was being taught. So, out of the 11 schools, 8 of the schools that were being watched were public schools, and 3 were private schools, which included single-sex schools, male and female single-sex schools. Now, the survey had 8 questions, and the first question involved how long they had been teaching, so it was a multiple choice question. The second was asking them to rate on a scale of 1 to 4, 4 being very well, how well they consider traditional mathematical assessments. The third question, they were asked to pick which alternate assessment they used out of the 6 that were being looked at. So did they use practical alternate assessment, oral, observation, parent? What alternate assessment did they use in their classroom? The fourth one was they were to explain why they would or would not use the alternate assessment in their classroom. The fifth question was they were asked to list the most common methods of assessment used. So for most, we'll actually get to the results of that later, but the 7th question was asked whether I'm sorry, did I skip the 6th? I think I did. The 6th one was asking whether the curriculum allowed for the use of alternate assessments, and the 7th question followed up with that. If they didn't allow for the curriculum didn't allow for alternate assessments, how could we adapt alternate methods of assessment into our curriculum? And the last question that was asked was what other types of alternate assessments could be used to assess students in mathematics. So now that we have all of the survey questions and the alternate assessments, we're going to go through the results. So the results concluded that teachers were satisfied with traditional math tests. Those who had less experience teaching seemed to be less satisfied with the traditional math tests, but were still satisfied with traditional math tests. The next result was they had which alternate assessment method was most commonly used. And for those who had less experience in teaching, they tended to use observation most. Actually, about 71% of teachers who were not very experienced used observation. And oral tasks and practical tasks were very close, with 64% of teachers using them. The most alternative assessment for experienced teachers was oral tasks, and about 83% of teachers used this. But again, following closely by observation and practical tasks. So we're kind of seeing a pattern here that the three most common alternate assessment tests were practical, oral, and observation. So the next result that was concluded was why teachers would not use alternate method of assessments, and the most common reason teachers would not was actually because it was subjective, so very opinionated. And another thing was why teachers would or would not employ alternate assessment methods in mathematics, and it actually fell into 6 categories. And the first one actually was insufficient time for implementation, and there were comments from the teachers saying things like it was time consuming and contained responses such as difficult to set up. And then, I'm sorry, I don't know why I said difficult to set up. That's the next one. The second reason was unstructured nature, and it's because it was difficult to set up. Another one was unsuitable, and that was because many people said can't see how it can incorporate into math, because it's hard to incorporate some assessments into math because math is so straightforward and logical. It's numbers and answers. And then the fourth one was unreliable or subjective, and it was a lot of things like very opinionated, or even things as students are too hard on themselves. The next one was insufficient resources, and that was mainly because of costliness. And the last one was suitable and beneficial, and the reason that this was one of them was because there were some positive responses to oral and practical assessments. So the next thing with the results was the most common result, or the most common assessment was still the traditional math assessment. And that was actually what the conclusion comes to. Our conclusion is that, so out of all 11 schools and 60 teachers observed and questions, the result was that teachers were satisfied with traditional math assessments as valid measures of student ability. Teachers didn't favor alternative assessment methods, although those with less teaching experience were more open to the idea of alternative assessment. And one reason I think that maybe teachers who were less experienced were more open to the idea was because of the fact that they are new and they hadn't been teaching long, so they're okay with changing some of their curriculum or some of their ideas around because they're new at it. But those who had been teaching for a really long time, they don't want to change their curriculum. They've been doing it for a really long time, and it seems to be working well for them. Now, this is not in my article. This is just something I've been thinking about, and I would say was probably a good reason as to why they might not be open to the idea. Now that we've learned that alternative assessment is not necessarily for math, and that we do like our traditional math assessments, I have a few discussion questions that were put on in the article. And the first one was, what is the state of teacher use of alternative assessment methods in math? And the next discussion question was, what are teachers' attitudes about using alternative assessment methods? And as we can probably tell from this article, teachers' attitudes were, they were open to the idea for alternative assessments, but for the main part, they enjoyed not having alternative assessments, but using the traditional math experience. So that is my article, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. And please leave comments at the bottom. Thanks.